I hated looking at mirrors at that time, Jonathan. Like anytime I would look myself in the eyes and let myself know I hated myself. I have got an unfixable problem. So I had two choices. One could be I could change the way I'm acting, but that meant giving up things I preferred. Or two, I could just get rid of the whole system where I even had to be accountable to something else. That's what I chose. I freely chose an...
Welcome to the One Step Podcast, where we share stories of change makers in different fields so that you don't have to wait for one day, but instead you can take one step today to create change both in your life and in the lives around you. And listen now. Not only is this the first in-person conversation that we're having on the podcast, but the amount of respect that I have for our guest today, in the words of MC Hammer, you can't touch this. He is a in-depth thinker, a brilliant mind. On top of that, he is a loving husband, an incredible father, a wonderful pastor, and probably the most intentional I've been able to witness. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to some and introduce to others. Make some noise for Pastor Bob in the building.
Prepare to be underwhelmed based on that intro.
No, but thank you for making the time, for real, Pastor Bob, for having the conversation. Unlike the common misconception that pastors only work on Sundays, I know your schedule is absolutely full. And so it's an honor having you to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I that is always a fun moment with people that kind of have that perception that must be nice to only have to really be on Sunday. I think that that's actually something that's translatable for all professions. Must be nice. From the outside, it always seems like we can quickly tell people how they could do things better, and without exception, we never can.
Yeah.
So, but it's a joy to do what I get to do.
Now, that being said, you weren't always a pastor. And so walk us through your own journey, however early you want to start, that can help us best understand your upbringing that brought you to where you are today.
It's hard for me to ever go short because as I've processed and analyzed and thought back on just how did I get to where I am today, and that's the product of intentionality. You have to be thinking forward, but sometimes the best material is being able to really understand where you come from. And I know that I was blessed, and I can see it now that way, to grow up in a home like I did. I had both of my parents, and I was one of 6 kids, and we were a religious family. And to me, that's a very important distinction now. But that religious bubble that I lived in meant that as a Roman Catholic kid growing up that was baptized and went to catechism and had first communion and became an altar boy and had all of these different practices. We were the type of religious family that went to mass every single Sunday, that we said the rosary every single day of the 40 days of Lent leading into Easter. We had holy days of obligation, like all of these processes. It was normal and natural for me to go and have times of confession where I would sit across a priest and try and be able to share the list of things that I knew were sinful. But again, I'm a kid, so I don't really actually comprehend any of this stuff. As I do the looking back, I can see that what I had on a fundamental level was a business relationship with this authority figure that was very distant and that required a obedient mindset. When I think about this as a dad now, that my parents sacrificed so that all 6 of us kids could go to a Catholic school for the first, from kindergarten through 8th grade, for me, I know now what that sacrifice took for them. I know also what I received in that time. And so there was a lot of good sheltering that I think it's interesting how much the world tries to cast it in such a negative light. And I get that. I get some of that mindset, but I also know that I was broken by this world deeply in many different ways. But the desire to be able to protect your kids and try and be able to help them gain as much wisdom and discernment and life experience before they interact with just how messed up this world is, how broken, how just soaked in wrong thinking and principles from top to bottom. I get that now as a dad of 5 kids, and it's hard. It's hard to try and picture, like, how do I protect this kid who they're still forming what they even understand about some of the most basic things. Meanwhile, there is this desire to pollute their thoughts at all times to try and help them incorporate into their souls some really messed up things. And so for me, that was my pathway. I grew up in that religious business relationship until I started to realize I don't like people telling me what to do. And I frankly don't trust most of the authority figures that I've seen because they're not trustworthy. On every level and every layer, I just keep seeing the same thing repeated. And I started to really, I mean, I'm talking at a young age. I mean, at 10 years old, 11 years old, I'm wrestling with these really deep questions about just how the human brain works. And is this part of just biology trying to protect us and keep us in this state of non-chaotic decision-making? I personally just kind of intuitively was wrestling with these things. And the sum total of it was that I didn't trust things. So then when I got to the point where I had deep preferences on what I wanted to do, and they were in this terrain of sin that I was being told I shouldn't do, can't do, it's not good. When I started to break those boundaries and just cross all the lines, in my own heart, I didn't know what was happening. Again, I'm a kid.
Yeah.
I don't realize as a young teenager what's happening, but my worldview is being shattered because I thought I was supposed to keep my side of the street clean. I thought it was a scoreboard, and I'm watching the score. I'm doing all these good things. You know, I'm not a bad person. Doing all these nice things for people, you know, as much as a kid can.
Yeah.
And then I realize in my own math, I'm like, well, this probably was a really big score against me. And in my heart, I have got an unfixable problem. So I had two choices. Again, not something I was consciously aware of. It's after the fact that I've looked back, I've been like, oh, that's what I did. That's how I processed that. I didn't like feeling guilty. I don't think anybody likes feeling guilty. I think that's where a lot of our conflict comes from. I think that's where a lot of our compromises come from, is we just get tired of feeling guilty. So I was like, I just want to get rid of this guilty feeling. One could be I could change the way I'm acting, but that meant giving up things I preferred. Or two, I could just get rid of the whole system where I even had to be accountable to something else. That's what I chose. I freely chose an atheist worldview. I'd already supported it richly in my heart with a lot of this feeling of nonsense and idiocy that I could see in some of the religious structures and a lot of the hypocrisy. And I came up with all the things that everybody freely flows to. They're not novel concepts. Anybody comes up to them to the same thing. So like whenever I hear somebody and I'm talking with them, it's so easy for me to relate. Within a second, I'm like, I felt that exact same way. Like this all felt like such a facade. Like all this stuff is just religious nonsense. And I spent 5 to 6 years of the most formative years of my life, from 15 to 21, just living that mindset, not realizing that in the pursuit of having no God, I was my God. And as living that way, I really only had one life I had to manage, and I ran that one straight into the ground. So that's how good I am at being able to manage anything at all, which humbles me constantly to think. Whenever I get in that position where I'm like, I got this figured out, I'm like, dude, you tried that. Like you literally had one life to live and you messed it up. Bad. I've talked a lot, so I'll pause there because I'm sure there's a better way to where you'd like to go.
No, there's definitely a lot to unpack, but I think that's a good starting point because I think this really sets the foundation of what a lot of people miss out on as far as the context, as far as where people start. Because I think a lot of people start like, oh, well, I grew up here and I had these different jobs and so forth, but not often do we hear the mentality of what people are thinking through, what people are feeling, their worldview as far as their upbringing, because that in reality, that does affect where we're going. And so to even just hear your mentality, where your worldview was at and how that transitioned and how that shifted, I think it definitely gives us better context into really understanding you, where you were at when you let go of your worldview to where you are today. Within that, those two endpoints, there's major gaps. And so I'd love to ask you to go ahead and elaborate as far as filling in the chapters, especially perhaps chapters that not many people are aware of.
Yeah, so I think the first job that I had that was like actual profession. I had lots of jobs before that. I had one job for one day, which was working in a shooting range, like shotgun shooting thing. I was like, this is not for me. I'd like to hear in the future. And okay. Was a waiter for years. And the first actual profession though was being a television news anchor and reporter and videographer. And so that was a lot of fun. But the interesting thing about losing any focus on what matters or having any type of a moral compass at the age of 15 to 21 means that all of the formative years of high school, where I would have been thinking about the longer view, and all of the years in college were all spent just kind of in this disarray of nothing matters. Everything's meaningless. What's the point? I'm a thinker. I don't have the ability to shut that part of my brain off. It's exhausting sometimes. So I'm overthinking everything. And at the sum total of it, I step back and I'm like, this is all meaningless. This is just like, the best thing I can do is try and make the most enjoyment out of this time, because it's just, I keep seeing the end of it. And the origin point of that was when I listened to authority figures at a young age, and they're like, look, it's really important that you try hard in this grade, because next grade, you're going to need it. Well, I get to the next grade and turns out I didn't. And then I get to middle school, turns out I didn't need elementary school as much as they all made it seem like. All of the negotiations, all of the carrots that they put out in front of us, when I got there, I'm like, oh, you just moved the thing. This is constantly a shell game of bait and switch. So I'm tired of playing the game. By the time I got to be 13, I was over that and just trying to figure out, well, what really matters? And that disillusionment ran deep. I went to a notorious ultra party school so that I could embrace all of the party all of the time and just live in a perpetual hangover until I'm like, this is awful. Like, I was deeply depressed at one point. And deciding, if I get to choose anything, this is miserable. It seems like it's supposedly fun because we're all having this social agreement that we are all enjoying this. We're not actually, because afterwards we don't remember it mostly, and we always try and just talk about the parts that were least awkward without ever actually overtly talking about it. And then you get to the end of that and you spend the time and you're like, when I'm actually just with myself, I don't like me. I don't like being around just me. I hated looking at mirrors at that time, Jonathan. Like, anytime I would, it was the weirdest feeling, but I would look myself in the eyes and let myself know I hated myself. Wow. It was a rough, and I'm not talking about once or twice. I'm talking about, there were years of that.
Wow.
But you get to the point where you're like, that's just what it is. Like, I'm stuck with me. The person I least want to be around, the person I least respect, the person who I least admire is myself. But you don't live there, because it's an unsustainable place. So you just keep moving to the next thing. So I just kept moving to the next thing. I always worked hard at whatever I did, so I found myself professionally doing well. I never found school hard, so I was able to graduate from that party school. As soon as I realized 2 years in, I'm like, this is not good for me. This place is not good for me. I took all the rest of the years of credits that I needed and got out of there a year early, and was working as a news anchor on the West Coast of the country. And that was seemingly going to be a cool thing to do. And when I look back, that job that I had was a phenomenal starting place if you wanted to be in that industry. Like, it's bonkers for me to think now. I mean, I've got, my best friend is still a news anchor, very successful in that. My brother works for a national news agency. And I'm like, I had a better starting point than both of them.
Wow.
Like, the experience I would have had just by the very nature, the market I was in and the experience I would have had on every layer was like so set up to be successful. And I remember vividly having this impression, like, I stopped, I'm like sitting at home. Like I said, I don't have the ability to turn off my brain. So when I go home and I'm trying to just sit down and relax, I'm thinking about my life and where I'm going. And at that time, I thought about who professionally in my industry would I want to be. And I named the person, but I don't actually want their job. Why in the world am I doing this?
Wow.
And then even before that, I'm doing all these really fun things. I look back at them now, they're like my favorite part of when people play Two Truths and a Lie, because I got these really random like realities that I got to do. I got to drive a tank and shoot all this little stuff. I got to feed baby cheetahs. I got to do all these like crazy, ridiculous things that were fun in the moment.
Sounds like you were living the dream.
Well, yeah, it's like everything else. I feel like it sounds like you're living the dream. I think all of us have this like idea of like, isn't all of social media built upon this idea of like giving the outside world an impression of the dream that you're living? And I remember vividly, laying on my bed and I'm looking up at this knocked down white plaster ceiling. And I asked God for maybe the first time in my life, sincerely and slowly, I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like in exasperation, just like, I don't, this all feels meaningless still. And I'm used to asking questions and getting no answers, and then I have to think it through. This was the first time that I had ever experienced what felt like a very loud, clear, like, I'm like, very clear 2-word response, not this.
Wow.
Which play that conversation forward, like, okay, care to elaborate?
Yeah.
You know, like I kind of was already feeling that. And that might have actually, if I go back, it's interesting how memory works, because the order of this would probably be important, Jonathan, but I don't remember if that conversation actually was right before the one where I thought through the profession I was in and realized I didn't want it, but I suspect it was. Because before that, I was just deeply committed to keeping my head down. Like, I would hope that everyone listening to this can relate to that feeling of like, I'm just going to put my head down, and maybe if I push harder and faster and stronger forward, then I'm going to break through to the truly open, rich, abundant life that I want. That it's just like by force of will, like tenacity. And I know not everybody's wired that way. I certainly am. But I actually found it when I slowed down enough to just stop playing that game.
I think you just touched on something really important. I think a lot of us are conditioned that way. I think from a very young age. I mean, we're taught, hey, if you just work hard, put in the work, you'll be successful. And whatever that success looks like. I think many of us want to force our will for our reality. And we think, I just got to work hard, and somehow in some way, things will work out. And I hope to accomplish whatever I'm pursuing.
And 90% of that is true, Jonathan.
Right.
Because it's built on actual principles of how the world is created and operates. Like, it makes sense. It does work. It is why, apart from any faith structure, people can be profoundly successful. They can work. You can. All of that, no, sorry, correction. 90% of that is true. The 10% really makes a big difference, though.
To which I was going to touch on, I think the fact that one thing you highlighted is the fact that you literally had to slow down in order to evaluate, which I think not many of us do, especially in our Western culture of constant go. Just work hard and it will happen. But you had to be honest enough that there was a misalignment of what you're pursuing and what you're internally dealing with, and had to slow down enough to try to align the two. And I think it's something I noticed just from you sharing your story, is that it was through doing so, you recognize and realize that what you're pursuing professionally was not bringing that level of fulfillment that you were desiring, and thankfully you had a very clear indication of like, okay, hey, this is not this. I'm sure there are many people who've had those moments of crying out to what we believe, God. Some might say the universe or whatever entity, deity they may think, and just wondering. I never got that clear indication of, oh, not this. For the person who's stuck there, of just in this space of uncertainty, of ambiguity, obviously your story was different, but you've also walked with plenty of different people as well, in specifically in your role as being a pastor. What would you encourage that person who's in that space of, I never got a clear indication, I'm still stuck in this space of ambiguity? How would you encourage that person in navigating towards their next step?
I think there's a reason that so much in our culture and in our world, no matter what country you're in, is constantly shifting towards pride and ego, because the pathway to peace is the exact opposite direction. There is a humility, there is a brokenness. When I think about the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I look back and I reflect on my life, it's interesting how much it followed a pattern that's really well articulated in the 12 steps that Alcoholics Anonymous understand really, really well. I didn't know the steps, but I look back at it and I see that's a clear reference. Like, those steps are anointed. They are beautiful because they really do give a process that has is so translatable to every human being. It's why a 100 other spinoffs have come from Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, just put a different word in front of Anonymous and you're going to find a different pattern, because those steps work, but those steps also work because they actually have a deeper truth that they're aligning to and connecting with that is actually the real basis and strength for why they work. And I think it's understanding that this world is broken, that I am deeply imperfect, and that it's not just I'm a good person trying my best. Like, what people mean by that, I understand, and I fully appreciate and think very, very similarly, even as a Christian, even as a pastor. But I think that, like many other things, it's just that little bit degree of truth mixed with misinformation that makes it so that it doesn't ever fully land on the mark, and that it's missing the whole point and the perspective. And that this humility, I was exhausted and surrendered. And like you said, there is plenty of people can be like, I was done. I was exhausted. I was surrendered. And yes, but there's different ways that looks like in each person's heart, because how God is going to reveal himself to a person that is deeply entrenched in not wanting anything to do with him is going to be tailor-made to each person. And I do believe 100% that he does for each person. And this is not a religious thing. Genuinely, this is a human thing. This is a truly human experience. And it's like many other things that we don't talk about because it's awkward. And it's like many other things where, because our experience is just 1 degree different, it gives us the mental permission to dismiss and move on and pack it away as not something I'll deal with today, but maybe someday I'll process that. And when I had that moment, it was preceded by years of being frustrated, years of essentially asking the same question, but with my caveat firmly entrenched blocking it. It's almost like, if I think of it from an analogy standpoint, it's like I've been asking the same question for 7 years before that, but with some form of my pride as a wall still between me and the one answering. I do not believe at all that would have been the first time God tried to get my attention. Because I see his hand. He protected me from so many things. Jonathan, I don't deserve to be alive. I certainly don't deserve to be a pastor. I don't deserve to not, whenever I get the privilege to be able to go and speak with people that find themselves incarcerated, I don't go into that being like, well, let me go help these poor people. I'm like, but by the grace of God, this is not a reversed role.
Wow.
Like, that is reality. That's not me trying to sound humble.
Right.
Like, no, that is deeply true. That is the actual fact of the matter, based upon the laws we have, the realities that exist, and my choices. My free will could have done differently, felt all the time this something being like, this is not right, still doing it because I'm in control. And it's just there's a humility. The answer is always that humility. Love is humility, because it's freely choosing the betterment of someone else at your own expense if necessary. Like, it's a humble posture. And nothing in our world really wants to celebrate that. Nothing in our world wants to coach that, but for places of faith communities. And there are some other aspects that appropriate that. I'm not saying that it's completely impossible, but it is a deep appropriation of something when someone is trying to form out humility as a strategy, as opposed to actual, look, you're just a human being. Stop acting like you're more. And I never want anybody to look like, I know that your love for me has you refer to me as Pastor Bob. I'm Bob. I'm a dude that I love Jesus. I'm trying to follow him as closely as I can. I'm trying every day. That's why I love your podcast name, One Step. Like, today, if I can do the best with my day today, I want to be 1 step closer. I want to be 1 degree better. Whatever that is, 1 millimeter is good with me. Like, if I can be going in that direction, I trust the passage of time and good choices that accumulate. I trust that compounding interest effect that just is replete in every area of life, that it is going to continue to be able to do that. But my basis, my purpose is to not try and focus so much on me. And it's hard.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking out through these eyes with this brain connected to it. And I'm a selfish person. That's just the truth. But I'm trying to be less of that, Jonathan. And because of that, I'm finding that I'm becoming more of a person I don't mind being around.
This is actually a perfect segue because I've had the privilege to be able to witness how intentional and compassionate you are towards others, even behind the scenes as well. And I mean, for example, like something that I know our community knows is that whenever you're having a one-on-one conversation, you are locked in. There is nothing distracting you from that moment of being present with that person. Based off what you said, it sounds like that wasn't always the case. That level of intentionality and compassion. I have 3 questions for you related to that.
You may have to repeat them because
I
know
will.
how good I am.
Yeah, I know.
I probably answered 100th of the questions you've already asked. But
Well, you actually answered one of them. The fact that we weren't always like that. So really, it's down to 2. The first question being, what impact has being others focused had on you and some of the other people that you've interacted with? And then the second question simply being,
let me answer that one.
Yeah.
Remember the second
okay,
one.
I will.
Because multiple questions. I love it. It's funny how often I do it to other people and don't realize how hard it is to answer. It is interesting when I talk to other pastors. I've heard this many, many times from other pastors that it's lonely to be a pastor. I don't feel that way. I think part of the protection from that is that I just try and be transparent. I think that there's this feeling from pastors intuitively that in order to be holy or in order to be growing or in order to honor God, that they've got to do the best job possible of shielding the reality of their sinful, broken life from everybody else around them. And the danger of that is we can believe our own hype. That's one. We can enjoy the hype, which is a separate and equally dangerous one. And then the other one is that we start to form a different type of mask than what we try and help other people realize they don't have to wear. It's a different type. So as a pastor, like you're genuinely trying to always model as best as you can Christ, knowing that none of us can do it perfectly, knowing that I can't be in any respect a really clear reflection of Jesus the way I'd want to be. But the goal is to be as good as I can be today compared to yesterday and just keep that going forward. But there is this perception that people have that I've just chosen to not buy into at all. And as often, and especially when I meet people that like they have a good amount of appreciation for the position that God's allowed me to be in, I don't in any way want to diminish the beauty of being a pastor, of caring for people and for loving people in this way. But I do want to diminish whatever their impression of me personally is, because that's not helpful to either of us.
Yeah.
I don't desire to get up on a pedestal because it's just that much more of an opportunity to knock me off of it. And I think without realizing it, that our society is so built in such a wonderful way to elevate people. And then we've done it for so long that as they fall, we kind of almost appreciate seeing the whole arc of like, let's elevate people, whether we realize it or not. And then when they fall, it gives us more reason to feel like, oh, see, that's not believable. It never was. Like, point in fact, you love me, I love you, we're friends. This is a friendship as much as it is both of us adding value to each other. And the fact that I get the privilege to be a pastor in your life, you're also influencing me in many positive spiritual ways, Jonathan. And that's wonderful. And I want more of that. But I definitely will let you and every other person down if you put me in the wrong position.
Yeah.
Like, if you see me rightly, I might be able to add some value to you because you'll be like, oh, that's the way not to do it. or there are occasionally times where it's like, hey, that actually worked. Like what he just did, I think I'm going to do likewise. Because I'm always looking all the time, not just at pastors, actually rarely at pastors, at other locations and spaces to be like, this is a good, and I'm not saying rarely pastors because I'm not aware of them. I am blessed to have some of the most amazing human beings in close proximity that I am absolutely trying to pick up on the good stuff that they're dropping. I'm just not usually focused that direction. My eyes are out towards the people that I'm leading. And so because of that, I'm picking up on great stuff that everybody's doing. And I'm trying to be like, man, I'll talk to people. And in the process, I'm trying to be a pastor in their life, but I'm hearing really good stuff. I'm hearing really good lessons that remind me of things, and it helps me get better. And that mindset, I think, keeps me in this posture where I don't buy into the hype of people. Like if I said something good, I guarantee you that the Lord used that moment. If I said something that makes your eyebrow raise, like, that guy's a pastor, that was almost 100% me. And that's the real me.
Yeah.
So you got a reality of like the makeup and material God's working with. And that's true of all of us. Like, you're a great dude, but Jonathan, you're not perfect.
Yeah.
You got some junk you need to work on.
Yeah.
So do I. I'm not saying that mean.
Yeah, no, you're
I'm
so
saying
right.
that is, we can only get better when we recognize the junk that needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
One step, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I'm super passionate when it comes to that. I also don't enjoy nor prefer when people, put me on a pedestal on several things. And I always try to lead with vulnerability just so people know, like, hey, I'm just as human as you. And really just to give evidence of like, wherever you see, whatever progress you see in my life and how you think, oh, he has these certain areas, has it all together. I always try to share my own story of where I came from and things like that, just so people could see for themselves, like, hey, if it is possible for me, it absolutely could be possible for you as well. And on top of that as well, like, I am still just as human. There are still things I'm working through and navigating through, and that's okay. Like, I think there's space to be honest and is to be okay and to be and to receive that well, to not always punish ourselves of, well, why am I not like that person? Why am I not like this person? It's okay to be in the space that you're currently in, to knowing that there is possibility, there is room to grow, that we don't always have to stay there, and that we're never going to reach perfection, but the goal is always going to be progress, and what you were sharing actually ties into the second question as well, is how would you encourage others in exercising being others focused?
Oh man, I've been fashioning my heart, and I mean that. Like, the one step mindset is something I have lived in, and I don't know of a time period that I wasn't, even when I didn't believe in God. Like, there was still this idea of I just want to get a little bit better. And so it's how I think and how I approach people. It starts from, I think I'm going to go one step back and repeat something and then move forward. I think it has to start with rightly recognizing that there is a even footing across all, that there's not any superiority, so that it doesn't become some sort of adding value to people from a vaulted position. It's really easy to start elevating ourselves, even in our own hearts and our own minds. Like, intellectually, I know more than this person. Well, great. So what? Like, you really, like, in comparison across all of stuff, there's always going to be somebody that knows more on different subjects. And as far as excellence on any attribute of humanity, there's an ability for us to have a good basis of humility. So that's the starting point. From there, others focus to me just simply means that I stop being so hyper-focused on what this world wants me to, which is my own pleasure, my own interests. What does Bob want to eat today? What does Bob want to talk about today? What does Bob, and just filling in all that. Like, that is such a vortex. It's like many times I feel like that cycle, it's such as ever decreasing circle. It's like a spiral, but the things that we see in life that are spirals are tornadoes, toilet bowls. These are not things associated with what I want my life to be, right? An ever decreasing center.
Yeah, right.
That is what the mindset, if you really follow the mantras, the marketing, and the approach of the world, is actively always drawing us towards, is this inward, downward emphasis. So to me, it is flipping that and trying as best as I can to walk slower, to see people, to activate the imagination of my heart and my mind in a way that actually participates with the story going on around me that I don't know, but trying to be able to incorporate it so that I become more aware. So in my context, and again, I hope I'm not completely lost on people just because there's this attachment of pastor before me. It's like, oh, this guy's already bought into a fairy tale. Like I appreciate that mindset. I would have felt similarly about people, but I might have tolerated listening to them long enough. And so in my context at church or anywhere else, I'm walking around and I'm seeing, and I'm trying as best as I can to read the body language, the postures, the outward signs that people are showing me of distress, because they're there. The micro expressions and then the obvious overt macro expressions. I'm not waiting to get a phone call from somebody to pray with them. I'm actively looking and interacting with people, and the 99% of the prayers that I'm going to be spending and the time I'm going to be spending in a heart that is wanting to add value to people are not going to be out loud in my best form.
Yeah.
You know, that's the pursuit, is that I'm trying to think. And then I'm also getting tangible. I'm getting real with different things. Is there something I can actually do to help? And I got to go back, and I heard the echo of what I just said. So prayer is actually very helpful in a way that somebody that does not have faith is going to be like, that's ridiculousness.
Right.
And I appreciate that. I'm not going to waste time right now trying to explain it, because it's mostly unexplainable. But what I meant when I said actually, I meant on a more tangible temporal level. Is there something I can do to meet a need? Is there a meal that can be provided? Is there just a hug that can be given? It is amazing how much a hug can make a difference. It sounds corny, but it ain't corny.
For real.
When you need one, you
For
know
real.
it. And what I found that's interesting about our current cultural moment is that every negative opinion that a person has feels like it's completely free pass to say what you want. But we will check ourselves on every complimentary thing we're going to say. And we'll come up with 50 different reasons. Well, I don't want to seem like I'm being a flower. I don't want to be too much, or I don't. So we will hold inside all the simple add values to people. And I'm not just saying we should just go around and trying to just have false praise and create that culture. What I'm saying is that there are genuinely beautiful things about every person. And most people have been fed a steady diet of their own self-recriminations and self-doubt, and then exterior things that they repeat, things teachers said to them in the past, things loved ones should never have said, things that people have done, and that we'll repeat that. But these little moments that seem so few and far in between, where somebody just has a good word for them, an encouragement, beyond just, I like your shoes, like something real. But if we cultivated that type of a society and a heart, if just individuals, doesn't have to be the society in general, if just anyone listening to this was just like, I'm going to get better at specifically praising people. If you can give a specific praise to somebody, if you can actually care enough to take 30 seconds from your ultra important life, I'm being sardonic, I know, but I'm saying it to myself too. You can take a couple of seconds from your super precious time and give it to somebody else in the form of a thoughtful, kind remark.
Yeah.
It will matter, and it will change things. And the cause and effect ripple relationship is enormous if it is on repeat. And the more that you have, the more stereos that are blasting that particular sound, the more things actually change. It is the heart of Jesus, so I can easily transfer this over into my faith understanding, but it is also one of those principles that will just work because it aligns with how God actually created things.
That's so good. There's 3 things I had to unpack from that, because that was so good. So you said something that was like, I don't want anyone just to miss. You were saying how the pattern in marketing is often to look inward and downward, and that your pursuit in being others focused is to flip that on his head. And the way I interpret it is to look outward and upward. And as you're talking about giving encouragement to others, something that I often have thought about is that really when it comes to encouragement, it costs us nothing, and yet it can mean everything for someone else. I think about the other added benefit when it comes to being others focused and giving encouragement to others and complimenting and so forth. The ancient Eastern King Solomon said himself in the book of Proverbs, man, those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. And there is so much truth in that. And as you just pointed out, the more that we exercise that, the more we get to experience that.
Yeah, that has been a life verse. Proverbs 11:25 has been a life verse for me ever since I heard it. It is a beautiful one. Those who refresh others are themselves refreshed. The generous prosper, and the generous is many times material. But if every person hearing me right now thinks about this, the most precious thing that we have is time.
Yeah.
I will never get back the time that I have spent, and I am not promised tomorrow. I'm okay with that. That throws people, I'm totally fine with that. I feel deeply grateful I've gotten the time that I've gotten. I do not expect, and I want to be appreciative tomorrow if I get it. And I try and live in that mindset to understand numbering my days. But our time, our words, the time it takes us to say words, to form a thought, to look and see people, is itself generous. And so the generous do prosper, but they don't always prosper in the ways that the world pictures. Some of the most contented people are never going to make it on an Instagram reel. They're not going to be the ones that are the best TikTok influencers simply because they're just not pursuing the same pathways. The less that I'm even aware of my part of the process and I'm just simply using this life to add value to others, it is so refreshing. My best days are walking away from something where if I'm honest, I poured myself out, but I look back and I'm like, that mattered. That was worth something.
Yeah.
Something is better because of this day. And that's good. And I genuinely don't care at all if anybody ever knows. Those are my favorite moments.
Yeah. I can absolutely relate to that. That is so good. We touched on it early in the conversation, but something that's very common in our culture. I mean, there's a lot of social pressure when it comes to positions that lead in a very public way. Being a pastor, for example. The reality is that even pastors are human, facing very personal challenges. I would imagine, as being a pastor, that you definitely felt the tension of navigating your own personal challenges while being expected to lead and to perform at a certain higher standard and in a certain way, to whichever extent you're comfortable. What were some of those challenges that you've had to navigate through, and what encouragement would you give to those who are feeling that tension right now? And to clarify even further, the reason why I ask all this is because I've had several conversations, and something I hear often is, how can I become XYZ if I'm dealing with this right now? And if we were super honest, I mean, there are probably skeletons in our closets that many of us have hesitated to address or just too afraid to address. And so, yeah, going back to the same question, what were some of the challenges that you have to navigate through? And what encouragement would you give to those who are feeling that tension right now?
So many things spark when you say that I'm just going to have to follow the navigation of what comes out of my mouth.
Sure.
Because honestly, I feel like there's two completely different directions I could go with this. The first one is on the nature of temptation and just how human it is and how little we ever want to actually talk about it. And even in circles, like I talked about with Alcoholics Anonymous, narcotics, and all that, there's so many different ways that we don't actually talk about the temptation as much. We kind of talk about the after effects of it. But the nature of how we are all internally battling and how we many times take personal ownership of something that is a very real attack. As I say that, I'm getting into terrain that makes it easier to dismiss anything else I'd say. So I'm going to go the other direction. But a big part of me would love to unpack that particular one. But I love staying in the terrain that is approachable to all and that is not so easy to dismiss as just like, well, yeah, that's because you picture things in this worldview. I think if there's 8 billion people on the planet today, there's 8 billion worldviews technically. And so to stereotype and funnel down just because. Like, I deeply believe that Christ-centered theism is empirically valuable, and had to go that route to understand it myself. Because I'm a thinker, I couldn't just absorb things and feel like I was just following the masses. So I have rational understanding for the things that are the basis of faith for me. And then there's lots of doubts. I have tons of doubts. There's tons of stuff that in faith that I still am like, that doesn't make sense. But I've gotten to the place on almost all of them where I'm like, but I understand why it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense, but the very nature of why it doesn't make sense, that makes sense. And so I have to trust something. I either trust my own intellect or I trust God. So I'll trust God for that.
Yeah.
And there's a billion things I now trust God for that. But I found out that turns out pretty well. I've lived both ways. I know how the one, and as I've walked this one, it's turned out a lot better. So let's go to the second thing then. When I think about every position whether it's a business leader, a leader of any kind, and people are looking to you in a certain way, and you feel like you have a persona. Even pastors have this temptation to have a persona. And it's not just a temptation. Part of it is a reality, that they are, on a fundamental level, going in a more orthodox language, that they are priests before the Lord. And they're supposed to be a priest before the Lord before they're ever a prophet before people, before they're ever anything else, before they're ever a pastor. They should be a priest before the Lord. And that should humble and should change things. Again, language that may disconnect. So let's get to the idea of somebody that's a business leader or a thought leader or somebody who's an influencer or whatever it is. When you look at your life and then you want to go and make a good stand for something, or you want to try and add value on every person that has ever lived, immediately at that same time, I suspect, because now while I've only lived inside of one person, it's been deeply consistent, and every other person I've talked to about this has been like, I know that feeling too. There is this critic that rises up. It's like, it has many different ways of the way the conversation goes, but who do you think you are is a great one. You know, if they really knew who you are, like, that's great. What about how you did just the other day? And like, really good internal language that rubs our own nose in our own loss. And if we really stepped back and thought about that, could anything ever go forward if we gave that voice, if we gave that narrative its yield, like we just yielded to it? No. Not a single invention gets made. Not a single failure becomes the fertile ground that it needs to. And I'm not excusing the broken things in us, but I am saying that conviction and shame are two very different things. I believe, in my understanding, in what I believe, and it's just my belief, that conviction comes as a gift. Shame is what comes right after to try and remove the gift off the table. It is as if I am constantly trying to help you see something that is holding you back, and as soon as it is out of my mouth, in comes something that's like, we cannot have that get built up, so we're going to go ahead and convert that entire statement into something that makes you feel less than, makes you feel worthless, makes you feel judged. When the truth was, stop adding that to the narrative. Stop agreeing with that. Stop going in that line of thought. It's like you have two conversations and it starts off with like, this could be better. This is not right. This is not how it should be. And then trying to draw you towards the ability to say, you're right, I'm going to turn from that. But instead it becomes, and you're bad for even ever doing that. And how dare you try and lead other people? Again, like, on that basis, I don't belong. Neither does any other pastor, by the way. I don't say that like, just maybe that's true. Like, that's 100% true. They're all flawed.
Yeah.
We all are flawed.
Yeah.
There's only one perfect. Now we're getting Christ-centered theism, so I won't go too far.
No, please feel free. Honestly, please feel free.
Well, I mean, the thing is that like the fundamental nature of what a Christian, not a religious person, that may also turn out to be true, but like a Christian, a Christ follower, believes is that the model and example and teachings of Jesus are true.
Yeah.
That they are 100% the sure-footing guide, and that he himself had a lot of statements that, like, it's nice to be able to put him up as like a cute moral teacher, like, but he's got a lot of good stuff. I might get his Audible book someday because he seems to have some stuff figured out. Like, and he can get up there in this pantheon of our current gods that, they've all these thought leaders. But unfortunately, like C.S. Lewis said really, really well, he didn't leave that as a reality that we can actually embrace if we're going to be thoughtful, because there are certain things he said that make him wildly evil or insane. And we can also play the fun game of, yeah, but those are human beings carrying it down. I'm like, what basis does anything in our society hold up to that standard? Like, then let's just like all agree that we're going to go live under rocks, because we can't have anything that anybody ever wrote or said be variable. Like, we can't. It's not verifiable. It's not trustworthy because a human being did it. I'm sorry. This is the world we live in.
Yeah.
So at some point, like, you got to step out of that nonsense loop. It's circular. It will never finish. So I just decided I'm not going to play that one. It's not fair. And I will take the recorded word and I will look at and go through all that. And I'm not going to geek out here, but there's a stupid amount of support for the verifiable nature of Scripture. But people get lost on tangents. So let's not even go there. Let's just talk about Jesus, the one who said, I'm the way, truth, and the life. The one who said, I have come that you would know life and have it to the full. The one who said that if we will build our life upon him, that when the storms and difficulties of life come, we will not be shaken. But if we build it on all of these granular, small things of life, that when the storms come, it's like the ground underneath us erodes, and we feel that. I've felt that in my life. But the one who looks at his disciple on the night before he's going to enter into the most difficult thing that any human being could ever experience, and he looks him in the eyes. This disciple who was actually with full faith trying to say this, he says, if you would just show us the Father, if you would just show us the God that we've all been worshiping and praying, if you would just show us him, that would be enough. John chapter 14, I believe, is where you find that. And Jesus looks at him and says, have I been with you so long that you don't recognize me? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Like, that's kind of stunning.
Yeah.
That is hard to just dismiss as like, wow, Jesus just like, they took, all these other things and adding these narratives that just don't match reality, so that we can walk away and feel like I still have a good reason to be my own God. Never saying it to ourselves that way, but I can still feel comfortable with my compromises because I don't actually have to align to some real standard, because the standard is whatever each of us decides to make it. That is a fantastic recipe for what we live in today. We live in the exact world that we're creating. And I don't know that anybody looks out and says, this is increasingly getting better and better. And that's another one of those really interesting things about Christ-centered theism. It's that one faith structure that actually unapologetically says, no, it's going to get worse. You're not inherently good. You're inherently selfish, which will lead, to what selfishness leads to. In a competitive environment, it's going to lead to brokenness. In a place where there's finite supply, it's going to lead to an accumulation that leaves others out. That's what's natural. That's what's going to happen. This whole thing is actually going in a increasingly more broken direction, but take heart. There is a better way. Jesus literally told us, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. That's what a Christ follower has the ability to actually hold on to, not as some sweet by and by fake reality they're telling themselves, but as an actual anchor.
Yeah.
That now I deeply appreciate the writings and the principles in the heart of other world faith religions. I do. I have consciously decided that there are aspects of them that don't, flesh out the full thing, but there is this fingerprint of truth that I find in them. And I'm like, yes, it feels like we're all saying a lot of the same stuff. But there's one that's kind of different than all the others.
Yeah.
There's one that is very clearly disagreeing on certain levels, but agreeing with a lot of the other stuff. Or may I say it the other way, that there's a lot of agreement towards Christ-centered theism. It's only when you get to certain subject matters that there's a very different direction. And as I've looked at the direction that Jesus carves out, I'm like, yeah, that actually, I'm walking that and I'm seeing that to actually make sense. And that's being proved out in the reality around me. And it's not just observational. It's something that I can look back at and see. We went a long ways there.
Yeah, no. Let me first say this. I appreciated that moment. That's very core of who you are, and I'm thankful that you get to give us this moment to express that. And as you were sharing, it highlighted for me that for the person who's not a Christian, there is real validity, real opportunity to test, to seek, to approach this and decide for yourself. I think the one thing with your story, as you mentioned, you're very intellectual. You're a person who is in your nature to think. I think your life gives evidence that faith and reason don't have to be on two separate tracks.
Oh yeah. Man, that always drives me nuts, man.
Yeah.
Because and I'm trying to raise kids that are going to understand and really intellectually pursue and seek the outer limits of understanding.
Right.
Like, I love science. I love mathematics. I love all of these things. And they just constantly keep revealing to me more and more this like amazingness of faith, and they support and strengthen. And yet everywhere else when I look, it's like they're seen as like these opposing forces. And I'm like, that's nonsense.
Yeah.
Why are we pitting them like they're in a ring against each other? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, even the very nature of like how we understand the human body, and there's wonders upon wonders, and there's so much inherent arrogance. I find it in myself. So I'm not surprised when I see it everywhere else, but there's like, just think about how every current moment thinks about the past, like as if it's archaic, like as if the further back you go, the dumber people are.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. There's some stuff we're doing right now that feels like it is just so dumb. And it's like, we know it's dumb.
Yeah.
And we're still doing it.
Yeah.
And we're still learning. I just don't believe we're ever going to get to the outer limit. And I hate that it has to feel like it's got to be opposed. And I really, it is obnoxious to my soul when somebody tries to tear down somebody developing a closeness to God by pointing out that it's not rational. And it's just like, man, that is not.
Misses the point.
That's not. You just completely just mocked, undercut, and dismissed, and made it seem like you can't go in this direction.
Right.
Like,
right.
I have to put my brain up on a shelf if I want to follow these Christians.
Yeah.
Because they are a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
Like, I get that people feel that way sometimes. I do see some of the things that that is purported as Christianity. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
that's fun. Thank you for that. Neat.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is what it is.
No, and along with that, for the person who is a Christian, everything you're describing as well really just points out that this is a type of faith that it's not just a ritual. Like, no matter your upbringing, whatever denomination or whatever the case might be, God genuinely desires a relationship with you. And we could be real and honest and open. It's not all about trying to keep performance or anything like that. And so both for the person who may not be a believer or for the person who is and just had this understanding of Christianity or a faith that, oh, I just need to do certain good works and hopefully I'll still make it, even though they've heard, quote unquote, the gospel message and still carry this works-based mentality. The reality is that God desires genuine relationship with you. And it validates so much so that he sent his own son to pay a price that we couldn't pay. I think the whole reason why it's very obvious that you're super passionate about your faith and how that intertwines with what you do. And obviously I share that same passion as well. I think the reason why we're so passionate about it is because it is definitely the core essential thing to really brings life change.
Man, when you've lived it wrong and you realize that there's a lot of people that are hurting, there's a lot of people that are disillusioned. I don't know on the face of the earth today just how many people are this close to giving up, but they're going to jump in and distract themselves, longer. And all the while it's missing this fundamental truth that you are precious, loved, created on purpose, for a purpose, designed, crafted. Everything about faith is actually incredibly empowering and beautiful. And human beings have done what human beings do best. And we have taken and distorted and perverted and changed that image into a religion and a man-made structure that does horrible things in the name of faith and does inexcusable things in the name of faith. And that is all faiths. And there is no exception.
Yeah.
And that's because in all of them, they're dependent on human beings. So why would we be surprised? But if we're ever looking for a reason to dismiss, we don't have to try hard. That's not ambitious, and that's not admirable to dismiss faith, because my goodness, you just look at any human being and there you go. You don't have to go hard. You'll be able to erode any reason why you should trust with just any average person. But all the while, if what I'm believing is true, and I say if as deference, not because in this moment I have anything other than the healthy doubt that says I am not omnipotent. So I live with that. I must choose what I believe, and I have chosen. And on that choice, I will die, and then we'll figure it out then. But my understanding is that that's not the end. My sincere, deepest belief, why a little bit ago I was able to say, I don't expect tomorrow. I'm grateful for it if it comes, but I'm not fearful of it. Not at all. It makes me a better human being because I realize how preciously short this time is. And I want to do the best that I can. I want to be as intentional as possible. I want to love my children well. I want to instruct and care for their lives well. I want my wife to know I love her. And I want to know in actual practice, day in, day out, that I am fashioning this human being, whatever the duration, in the direction that is most aligned to the goodness of God. And as I do that, whenever the moment comes that this experience is done, I will definitely not be worse for it, no matter what happens next.
Earlier in the conversation, you walked us through your journey being a news anchor and your time in college and so forth. And there was a period how you hated seeing yourself in the mirror. Would that Bob back then would have been able to envision to see the Bob where you are today?
I remember waking up after probably a solid year of hangovers. And I think in metaphors, but I felt this metaphor deeper than I just thought it. I felt like I was at the bottom of a well. I mean, it helped by the fact that I'm in a dark room and I'm just laying there, again, looking at a ceiling. Don't know why that seems to be a recurrent theme, but it's dark and I'm just in my thoughts, in my feelings, and trying to figure out why I just keep doing the things I don't like about myself. And I'm in that space. And the closest to suicidal ideation I would have ever had in my life was in that season, honestly, but even in that moment. And I knew I would never do that. I just, for me, that was never going to be an option. And it just felt so miserable because I was just like, I just got to keep living this life now because I will not do the one thing. But I also am just constantly around me, and I'm just constantly self-medicating to not have to think about me. And it felt like in that moment, like I was at the bottom of this well. And the only reason I knew it was a well was because there was this pinhole of light that, you know how your eyes kind of adapt to light? Like it can be super dark, but if you're sitting in it long enough, you can start to perceive stuff unless there is a complete absence. So I'm in that mode. And as I'm sitting there, I'm realizing with this increasing awareness, my eyes are attuning to how deep down I am. And I'm on my back at the bottom of this well. And I'm just, it is exhausting to even think about trying to climb. Because if I climbed 10 miles, I would still have an enormous amount of length to go, is what it felt like. And I just wanted to lay down and just quit. I don't know. I mean, it's not like that. I'd given myself that option. There was no version of quit, but I didn't want to take one step, Jonathan. I didn't. I just wanted to be done with hating the circumstances I was in. In scripture, I always have this part that I remember Paul wrote, where he writes in a letter that he wrote to this church in Rome. It's the place you find it is in chapter 7 of Romans, but he's like, the thing that I don't want to do, I do. And invariably the things that I do want to do, I don't do those things. Who can save me from this wretched life? Like, I felt that at such a visceral, tangible, real level. I will never forget that feeling. I am motivated by that emotion. Wow. Because I have long since, decades ago, exited the well.
How'd you get out of the well?
It was so I only did what I knew. So since I only had a Catholic upbringing, at that point, I just realized that my life had become unmanageable. Like I said, I started doing the steps without ever having read the steps. I didn't have a community for alcoholics. I didn't identify at that time as having these patterns that were so clearly alcoholic. And like, I didn't have any of that. So I just did at that point, and I don't think this is the recipe for people to follow. I'm just going to tell you what I did. Like I went to a confession with a priest, and I told him, I'm coming back, and I'm going to keep coming back every single week. And I used pride, I think. When I look back, I used pride as a way to get myself to start movement, because it's all I had. I know that Jesus, I look back, I also know, but this feels like I'm over spiritualizing. I'm not. I'm probably under spiritualizing, but it sounds to others like I'm over spiritualizing the reality. But the truth was, in those moments, before I could recognize his voice, and we all know that something told me I just needed to start doing something different. And I did not believe I had the ability to do something different, because I had proven day in and day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, that I could not do anything other. And that even though I didn't want to, I was always going to succumb to these other pressures. So I went, I sat across from a priest. I told him the junk I was embarrassed and shameful about. And that was like, I don't want to do that again, man. That was awkward as all get out. It is super awkward. And prayed whatever the amount of Hail Marys and Our Fathers and Glory Bees that was assigned to me. And then when I went to go make the poor choices again, I just started to avoid them more, because I hated the idea of sitting across. Because I told myself, well, this was one thing. Like, I was like, you will tell him. You will keep going, and you will tell him everything. And that was horrifying. And that was the start point. Like, that was what got the momentum. I mean, this would be the longest, potentially most boring podcast in the history of the universe if I told you each step. But it wasn't even one step. It was one claw hold out. And it felt like that for a long time. I mean, in those times, at some point I came to the revelation of, this is not a good place for me. This party school I'm in, this is not good for me. I must get out of here. And I'm not going to just quit and go to another school. Like, I will finish this. Like, you will, I was pretty legalistic, but of course I was a Catholic. So legalism was not hard for me. Like, I had taken a master class in legalism. So I knew how to work that game. And I just worked that game until I started to get to a place where I could see light. And there's this, my heart lives more, Jonathan, in these last stages of just kind of like the last months and year of something that Jesus said right after the most familiar verse that people know, even non-Christians, that for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Verse 17 is as magnificent. It doesn't get the press, but John 3:16 is fantastic. John 3:17 is also fantastic. But when you get to John 3:19, 20, and 21, and I don't have it memorized, but I probably should, it talks about this comparison of people who there's the darkness and there's the light. And people who know that their deeds are evil stay in the darkness because they don't want it to be exposed. But people who live in the light bring their whole life into the light because they're not afraid for people to see whatever they live. And it is possible to live that way. And as you live in that, the enemy will never stop asking you to come and enjoy the comfort of the shadows. Like that happens. But I'm really feeling the reality of that out of the well and wanting to stay in the light. And when you've been in darkness, I've said this to you and I won't say more than just, I'll stop in a second here, but I was not brought towards God because I experienced the goodness of God first, at least not in a way that I understood, not in my intellect or understanding. I was deeply aware of the evil of this world because I was a part of it. I was deeply conscious of the brokenness, and I realized that I was the weirdest type of atheist. I felt the reality of hell and refused to acknowledge heaven. And that motivation still lives in me to be like, just more in the light, Bob. It's not more complicated. I don't want to be pulled away from the simplicity that is in Christ. That is what disciples of Jesus urged us, is do not make this a complex thing. Do not be drawn away from the simplicity that is in Christ. Like it is simple. It is not easy. It is simple though. Live your life as one life. Live it in the open. Live it to add value to others. We're done. Like, acknowledge and love him, and you will find the capacity to live in the light and to live an open life, and you will actually desire to add value to others, and you will be informed on how to do that, tailored specifically to you. You will see, and you will be able to know and care for people at an increased capacity, because his desire is to bring wholeness to people, and you get to be a part of that. I don't think I can thumb up. I love that. Thumb up. I'm going to thumb up. I don't think I can sum up. I do love that there was an imperfect moment right before I tried to say it.
There you go.
But I don't think that I can sum up my personal theology and my view of this world and creation. It's more simple than what I just said, even when I thumbed it up.
You added so much value to the conversation, Pastor Bob, and I'm really thankful for you. Thank you. So really thankful for this time, and I know we are better for it. I know that the best days are ahead of you and all that you're pursuing and the vision that you have, and to bring change not only to your life that you've continually have been doing, but also to the change of this region for the better. And so I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege, and I love you.
Love you too, Pastor Bob. Thank you for tuning into One Step. It would mean so much if you subscribe and leave a review on your favorite platform, as you'll be a part in promoting this show to becoming better and bringing you practical insight. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can visit onesteppodcast.com, where you'll find helpful links such as following our social media pages and even leaving a voice message to ask questions and give feedback. Who knows, you might get featured on a future episode. Overall, thank you. And remember, change begins and continues with one step.